Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our first APPA Agora of 2024. Hope the new year is going well for you all. I'm Lou Marinoff, your host, and it's a great pleasure to welcome our special guest today. Our featured guest is Tom Morris. Tom is a graduate of UNC Chapel Hill, the recipient of a double PhD from Yale University, and holds honorary doctorates in recognition for his public work. After a first career at Notre Dame, he went on to become a public philosopher, authoring so far over 32 published books, including national bestsellers, while bringing philosophy to many of the best-known companies in the world. Tom's the author of books like True Success, If Aristotle Ran General Motors, Philosophy for Dummies, The Stoic Art of Living, If Harry Potter Ran General Electric, and the highly praised short novel, The Oasis Within, a book about Steve Jobs called Socrates in Silicon Valley, and a book about dealing with difficult and disruptive change called Plato's Lemonade Stand. His work has been covered by most American television networks like ABC, NBC, and CNN, CNBC, and in most major newspapers and magazines around the world, including the New York Times and the Economist. He's also been described as the world's happiest philosopher. So without further ado, let's all welcome Tom Morris. Okay, here we go. So it's really great to see you, and I'm so pleased and privileged, and I'm sure everyone is, that you've joined us. So thank you very much, Tom, for making the time today.
You know, it's a joy for me to see you again, Lou. You're one of the most eminent and fun visitors we've ever had at the Morris house, and it's always good to see your face.
Well, I'm very happy, to be friends with you all these years, and I hope your family's well and all of that. But I do remember our very first meeting. I bet you do. Was almost 25 years ago. We were in NPR studios together in New York City, doing Talk of the Nation with Ray Suarez, if I remember rightly. And
That's
I walked
right.
in. Yeah. And I walked into the studio and I saw Tom. I saw this already famous philosopher sitting there reading Plato, not Prozac. And I said to myself, "Uh-oh, I hope he likes it." But basically, we gave them a pretty good tag team, didn't we? 1-2 punch.
We did. We hardly gave Martha Nussbaum a chance to say anything that day. We were both so talkative.
Right. And that's not easy because she has a lot to say. Tom, let me start. And I'm going to ask you some questions that I've been trying to ask you anyway, and maybe have and maybe haven't. But let's, for the benefit of our wonderful audience today, ask a couple of things that are in the back of my mind. And then we're going to open up the mic because I know we have some wonderful philosophers and practitioners and members of the public here who may want to interact with you, and we'll certainly give them a chance. So first of all, was your first degree at Chapel Hill in philosophy? Were you attracted to philosophy right from the get-go, or did you find your way into it?
Oh, that's a good question. I was the first person in my family ever to go to college, on both sides of the family. And my senior year in high school, my mother said, "Look, there's no money for college, so you should just figure out what kind of job you want to do." And in my family, there were truck drivers and farmers and mechanics, and my father ran a radio station. And I thought my friends were going to college. I wish I could too. And then all of a sudden, the Morehead Foundation, now called the Morehead Cane, got in touch with me and said, "You've been nominated for a full scholarship, all expenses paid to Chapel Hill." So yeah, I got the Morehead Scholarship. I went to Chapel Hill. My parents said, "You got to do a practical major like business or something." So, right. So I started off majoring in business, just didn't like the major at all. I took a religion class with a guy who had his PhD in theology from Princeton and also a degree in drama. And this guy was so good that you'd forget to take notes. You were at a one-man Broadway show, basically. And then I had another professor in philosophy who was just as good. He was an Orthodox Jewish rabbi who was Hungarian and did philosophy of science, but he was a mesmerizing character. So these guys kind of lured me away from business. I took 5 or 6 classes with each of those professors, and I majored at first in philosophy. Then my second philosophy course was an ethics course that I thought was going to be really practical, and it was the opposite. In fact, it was so boring, I dropped my philosophy major and went with the religious studies side of things. So I went to graduate school in the department that was number one at the time. Yale and Chicago were tied for number one in religious studies. So I went to do religious studies PhD, but I couldn't get the philosophy out of my system. And so I kept sneaking into philosophy classes. And then one day I'd ask some probing questions or something, really probing for a 22-year-old, I guess. And the director of graduate studies at Yale said, why don't you switch departments, come into philosophy? I said, well, I really like religious studies. He said, well, look, one guy before you has done a double degree. Why don't you consider it? You'll double your chances in the job market. And so my friends like to remind me what 2 times 0 is at the time, but nonetheless, I did courses in both departments, 2 directors on my dissertation, 2 sets of exams, the whole thing. So I had to find my way back to philosophy. I had left it for a while, but it had never left me.
That's so amazing. But a double PhD, is that one thesis that counts in both departments?
Well, it was a double thesis. It was one document, very large, but the first half of it was on identity statements, A equals B, and it became the book Understanding Identity Statements. And the second half was on the central Christian doctrine of the incarnation. And they said I was had the biggest dissertation defense in the history of either department. It was like people gathering for a car crash, I think. The theologians were saying, what's all this stuff about Leibniz law and modal logic? And the philosophers were saying, what's all this stuff about the Council of Chalcedon and the early church fathers?
You're a hard case, Tom, but it worked out really well. So you ended up getting a job then at Notre Dame, which was a very fine institution.
Yeah.
And was that helped? Was that abetted by the fact that you had the double PhD?
Yeah, it was mostly helped and abetted by the fact that my best friend at Yale, I think, was the smartest guy at Yale. He was a graduate student who grew up in the rough neighborhood, Spanish Harlem, New York. He said all of his friends from childhood were dead or in jail. His name was Jorge Garcia. He was smarter than our professors. And he and I would roam the streets of New Haven an hour or 2 every day, talking philosophy, pulling each other back from oncoming traffic at intersections, and saving each other's lives. And he interviewed for Notre Dame the year before I was on the job market. And they said his interview was the greatest interview in the history of the philosophy department. He was that kind of intellectual. He was like a 19th century British intellectual, basically, a kid from Spanish Harlem. And he talked up my dissertation. He talked me up when he got to Notre Dame. They already loved this guy. And so I was one of the 494 people that applied for a job there at Notre Dame that year. And one of the 16 that got interviewed, thanks to my friend Jorge, I'm sure. And it was the philosophy department rather than religious studies. And here I was, they wanted me to teach philosophy of religion. So the dean interviewed me and he said, look, I know you're a Protestant in background. Would you be comfortable teaching philosophy of religion at a Catholic institution? I said, you guys have always believed in philosophy. So I'm just trying to do in my small way in our time what St. Thomas was trying to do in his time, explore issues of faith and reason using the best analytical tools available. And he said, good answer. So I got hired.
Good for you. But weren't you also doing modal logic?
Yeah, I was doing some pretty complicated philosophical logic, modal logic, set theory, stuff like that. You read my book, The Logic of God Incarnate, you're going to see sets and supersets, and you're going to see modal stuff. And I was writing articles in the journals that, well, when I got hired at Notre Dame, they said, one of your lifetime ambitions should be to get an article before you retire in the Philosophical Review, because that will just make your career. This is back in the 80s. And I said, oh, okay, that sounds good. Well, my 3rd year as an assistant professor, I had an article in the Philosophical Review, and I was so proud of it. So I get to the American Philosophical Association meeting that year in Boston, and a well-known philosopher comes up to me and he says, hey, congratulations on your article in Phil Review. I said, oh, thank you very much. He said, I tried to read it and it gave me a massive headache. And I mentioned that because I was discovering or inventing new modalities of property exemplification. That's the kind of stuff I did before I got into public philosophy and more practical philosophy.
Right. And we're going to get to that momentarily, because you've had these two, you obviously had a distinguished career at Notre Dame and could have written more books, I'm sure, on modal logic. So tell, however, you always have this other side to you. You've had the orator and the motivator and the preacher too, I think. So tell us about the Notre Dame marching band. That's an unbelievable anecdote. Okay, I'm sure most of our audience would love to hear this.
Well, I wrote a book called Aristotle Ran General Motors. It's about truth, beauty, goodness, and unity. I believe from the moment we get up each day, from the moment we wake up to the moment we fall asleep at night, we experience the world along four dimensions. The intellectual, we need truth. The aesthetic, we need beauty. The moral, we need goodness. The spiritual, we need a sense of unity or connectedness. And so I tried to bring all four of those dimensions, all four of those targets, truth, beauty, goodness, unity, into the classroom every day. I would dress up in a department of philosophy professors that wore tennis shirts and dirty khaki pants to class. I would put on a suit for the students with a bright tie. I'd have colorful things in the classroom. I had walk-in music for every class because the students had asked for that. They said, look, like talk shows, we should have walk-in music. Okay, we have walk-in music. I'd throw out candy bars for good answers. And for each of the exams, I realized I needed some music to put people in the mood. So for the first exam, we always had the song, you may remember it from long ago, Don't Worry, Be Happy. The guy whistling, right? It's kind of a Jamaican song and very happy. My TA, one of my TAs said that, one of my graduate students said that day in front of 300 freshmen, he said, this is the only festive exam room I've ever been in my entire life. People were whistling along with the song. So usually the second exam, I had Stevie Ray Vaughan caught in the crossfire. It was second of three exams. And well, last year I was at Notre Dame. They didn't do too well on their first exam. They did very, very poorly. They were seeing letter grades that they had never viewed as seniors in prestigious high schools around the country. I knew they were going to be worried. I knew they were going to stay up too late. I knew they would come into the second exam very high agitation, high anxiety. So there was no walk-in music. It was quiet. It's like a crypt. They all sit down. It's quiet. They don't know quiet in my classroom. There are 12 teaching assistants across the room holding exams in their hands. And usually when the students sit down, well, I mean, that's it. You know, we hand out the exams. Total silence. We stand there still. 5 seconds, 10 seconds. What's going on? What's he doing? 7 doors got kicked open in the back of the auditorium, and in came the Notre Dame marching band playing the victory march for my freshmen. They jumped on their chairs. They were yelling, screaming, singing with the band. And I tell y'all, every single student made a higher score of that exam than they did the first exam. So then a kid comes up to me after class, Professor Morris, how'd you think to bring the marching band into philosophy class? I said, why should they just play in the football stadium where it doesn't do reliable good anymore? Why don't they come to the philosophy class where it really matters? She said, what are you going to do for the final exam? I said, I don't know, fly over of Navy jets, whatever it takes. But it's been a legend ever since, I think.
Well, the Chicago Symphony, something. Oh, that you're a mover, a shaker, and a motivator. There's no question about it. So how then did you segue into becoming a public philosopher? Was there a turning point? Was there a one time which basically got you around that corner?
Well, it was the most unexpected career swerve you can imagine. I was doing philosophical theology, philosophy of religion, modal logic, intro to philosophy, working with graduate students on really complex topics. And one day I got a visit at my house from a woman who ran the Chamber of Commerce in South Bend, Indiana. And she said, look, when I was a student at Notre Dame, when I was 19, we used to stay up late at night in the dorms and talk about things that really matter, really interesting things like love and death and meaning and purpose. And she said, I'm 45 years old now, and all we ever talk about when I get together with my friends is, you know, what's on sale at the mall, what are the kids doing this weekend, who's Notre Dame playing tomorrow. She said, we never talk about important things anymore. Could you come to the Chamber of Commerce and do a day on philosophy for us? I said, oh, sure. I mean, Socrates thought the least important things we think about and talk about the most important things we think about and talk about the least. Yeah, let's turn that around. I want to come to the Chamber of Commerce. Well, we're doing a theme on ethics. Well, I wasn't the ethics guy. So rather than saying, well, I'm the wrong guy, you got to call this person instead. I said, okay, I'll put together something. It was about 100 people, young business people from town mostly, deemed to be future leaders in their businesses. And pretty much all of them asked me afterwards to come to the Rotary Club, come to the Kiwanis Club, come to their real estate, come to their bank. I was given free talks constantly for 2 years in South Bend, Indiana. And a guy who had been a pretty well-known speaker before he became a philosophy graduate student came into my office one day and saw all these mugs and baseball caps and ballpoint pens with the names of these companies on them. He says, "Is this what you're getting paid for your speeches? These mugs and baseball caps and, logos with banks on them?" I said, "Yeah, isn't it great?" He said, "You can actually get paid money for your talks." I said, "Come on, people are going to pay for it." He said, "No, really." And I thought, I can't do that to people. I'm having too much fun. The next person who called me had a budget, Lou, and it was $50, and that just changed my life. I said, "Yeah, I'll come talk for $50. That's a week's groceries in the 1980s, right?" And so before you know it, I was being asked to go all over the country. I gave a free talk to Junior League of South Bend, and the woman in charge went home and told her husband, who was international head of education for the Young Presidents Organization. She said, "You got to get this guy to do the next YPO event." He said, "It's impossible. It's a cruise to Russia, Finland, and Sweden, and we're all booked up and everything." She said, "No, you have to get this guy, this young professor." And he said, "All right." And so the next thing you knew, my family and I were in Helsinki and St. Petersburg and Stockholm, Sweden, and all these 250 presidents, president of Volvo, president of Pepsi Cola, president of all these companies, they were inviting me to come to their companies to give talks when I came back. So all of a sudden, Lou, it was the instant career I never expected to have.
Right. And they were giving you a little more than $50 for this, I believe.
Yeah. In fact, it was kind of nosebleed territory pretty soon. I was really surprised at this. And so we became very philanthropic really quick, because I grew up in a house about the size of the room I'm in now, an 800 square foot rented house. My wife's dad was a carpenter. We weren't accustomed to dealing with large amounts of money, and I don't think most philosophers are. And so we became very philanthropic, and we just thought, well, this can't last, can it? And people told me, they said, public speakers in the business world have a typical career average of 3 years. So you shouldn't even think about leaving Notre Dame. Keep your day job. But I felt a sense of mission, that I was not supposed to wait for people to come to Notre Dame, but I was supposed to go to where people were. And my wife would pick me up at the airport and take me to teach class. I'd teach another class. She'd take me back to the airport. She said, "You may have to make a decision pretty soon. You're living 2 or 3 lives at the same time, writing a lot of books, giving speeches, teaching classes." And so I left in 1995. I retired at the age of 43. It was a wonderful place. I hated to leave, but I felt a real sense of calling to do what I've been doing ever since. And that 3-year career, I think that I was told that in 1995. So and here we go, Lou, you and me both, buddy. They can't keep us down. We're like ever-ready bunnies. We keep philosophizing.
Well, keep more power to it, Tom. But I mean, that's extraordinary. It must also put pressure on your family life. I mean, you were bringing up kids at that point.
That's
and
right.
You were very largely traveling. You were on the road or in school, and it must have been stressful also in terms of the family unit.
It was. I was on 400 to 500 airplanes a year some years, and some of that was because I insisted on coming home between talks. If it was 2 talks on the West Coast 3 days apart, I'd come home. I tuck the kids into bed at 10 o'clock at night, have breakfast with everybody the next morning. Even if my wife had to take me straight to the airport thereafter, I was always going to show up at home as often as I possibly could. And it was unexpected, though. I never thought I would have such a crazy schedule, but I'm glad I was able to plant the seeds with so many groups of sometimes a room of 12 people, a CEO and his 11 direct reports. Sometimes a room of 5 or 10,000 people, and everything in between. Just experiences I don't think a philosopher has ever had before. And I've tried to learn from every single trip, from every single event, from every person I've met along the way. I can't just read Plato and Aristotle and the Stoics. I've got to be understanding what people are going through now in order to make that mix, in order to have that magic alchemy, bringing the ancient wisdom together with modern challenges. And I know you share that passion with me. And it's just a wonderful thing to see people so receptive to ancient ideas in our time.
Well, because they never grow, unlike us, they never grow old, Tom. And we're training the next generation to carry on the work. I mean, somebody had to pioneer it. anew. I don't think practitioners ever disappeared from the scene. Probably every generation has had some philosophers who've been active in public life.
That's
And
right.
I think we need more and more, especially at this time. So it's
Yeah.
great that you're doing this, but you're also shining a light on possibility for younger people.
Oh,
And there
yeah.
are more and more younger philosophers now who see public philosophy in one form or another
Yeah.
as a legitimate and viable career. We still want them to have the formation. I'm sure you agree. We
Yeah.
want to have the education. We don't want to get up there and just improvise on nothing. I mean, it's possible, but better to have the solid foundation,
Yeah.
right?
You're absolutely right. I mean, my dad was a high school graduate, never went to college, but he was a lifetime reader of philosophy. Our little 800 square foot house was full of books by Plato and Aristotle and the Stoics and St. Augustine and Aquinas and Descartes. And so I grew up in a house. There probably weren't more than 50 books in the whole house, but almost all of them were philosophy books. So isn't it interesting? I ended
Yeah.
up becoming a
Sounds
philosopher.
like Spinoza's library, very small, but extremely intense.
That's
That's
right.
fantastic. So, let's talk about some of your books. Philosophy for Dummies has been a huge success. Yes, of the whole series. I
Yeah.
must confess, I don't have a lot of dummy books on my shelf. It would embarrass me. I mean, I feel like a dummy enough already sometimes without having to look at them. But seriously, you've done a great job with that particular book. How did that happen?
Well, that was a strange, unexpected experience too, Lou. I gave a talk to 2,500 drugstore executives in the Breakers Hotel in Palm Beach, Florida, one day. And Daniel Goleman was on before me, the guy who wrote the book Emotional Intelligence, which really caught on in the business world. So Daniel gave a talk, and then I gave my talk. I was asked to give a talk on True Success, which was my first non-academic book to come out in 1994. And so I did that. I did an energetic 45 minutes or an hour on True Success. About 4 days later, I get a phone call. Hey, Professor Morris, a young woman is on the line. My boyfriend's executive vice president of CVS drugstores, and he invited me to come into your session, and I really loved it. And I'm the acquisitions editor for all the Dummies books. We want you to do philosophy for dummies. I said, whoa, 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 whoa. You guys do gardening books, car repair books, computer books, philosophy for dummies? And she said, look, she said, yes, but we're starting to launch lifetime learning. And we've had Thomas Hoving, curator of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, agree to do art for dummies. If you will agree to do philosophy for dummies, you two guys can launch our lifetime learning series. We're going to go into the arts, the humanities, the sciences. I said, wow, I'm proud to be asked to be part of an expansion like that. Could I turn my intro class at Notre Dame into the book? I've never turned it into a book. And she said, yeah, do that. So that's how that resulted. And a few years ago, about 3 or 4 years ago, they came to me and said, we're asking the best-selling Dummies authors to do a new edition of their books. Would you do that? I said, sure. So I did a second edition for Philosophy for Dummies about 3 or 4 years ago. And then this time last year, they called me again out of the blue, a new editor. And she said, Stoicism is everywhere. It's in sports, entertainment, business, the military. They're best-selling books, New York Times best-selling books. She said, should we do a Dummies book on Stoicism? I said, why not take advantage of the opportunity, right? How often does a particular ancient philosophy become big in America? It tends not to happen here. We're a pragmatic people. It's very rare. A little bit of existentialism with the beatniks and with the hippie generation and some Eastern philosophy with the Beatles and all that. But it is rare for an ancient philosophy to become a big thing in America. So yeah, you guys should do it. She said, okay, you do it. I said, well, no. I got other things to do. I'm busy. No, please, really. This time last year, would you do 384 pages on it for us by September? And I said, well, let me think about it a couple of days. I wrote a friend of mine who was one of my graduate students. He had been a teaching assistant for my big philosophy class at Notre Dame. I taught this guy, I'd done guest lectures at this guy's university a couple of times, but it had been 5 years since I talked to the former graduate student who was now a pretty well-known philosopher in his own right. He did the big Barnes and Noble coffee table book, the philosophy book, Illustrated History of Philosophy. He's the only guy I know who did a critical thinking book that has given him in royalties more than $1 million, mostly from China. where you would think critical thinking is the last thing that the powers that be would want to encourage. But anyway, I got in touch with this guy out of the blue, not having talked to him in 5 years. I said, Greg, I've been asked to do a book, Stoicism for Dummies. Would you be interested in co-authoring? I'd never co-authored a book. I don't want to co-author a book typically. I want every word to be responsible for every word in the book. And he says, whoa, I can't believe you're asking me that. I've been doing a deep dive on Stoicism for 4 or 5 months, had just decided to write a book on Stoic virtues. He said, why don't I join you and weave it into Stoicism for Dummies? I said, let's do it. And so it came out a week ago. I think it was a week ago, Stoicism for Dummies. And in the first few days, people were saying, my copy is not being delivered. My copy is not being delivered. That I pre-ordered. And it turns out that, and keep this quiet, this is not supposed to be public knowledge, but turns out that an Amazon truck full of our books disappeared. And the next sentence I read in the report was an investigation is underway. I mean, I suspect maybe the Sopranos have new reading habits and they're looking into Stoicism. But whatever the
what state did it disappear in? I mean, New Jersey would be definitely suspect if that were the case.
Yeah, they fell off the truck. What can we say?
Yeah, okay.
So yeah, that's my history with the Dummies. The Dummies people, they've been gracious, they've been generous, and it's brought a lot of people into my life. Like one guy, old guy, bought my book Philosophy for Dummies in Barnes and Noble a few years ago, read it, wrote me a scathing email with objections to it. On page 279, you say this. What about that? My favorite author says the opposite. So I write this guy back and reconcile the two passages. And he says, oh, maybe you're right. What else of yours should I read? And pretty soon this guy becomes one of the editors on my fiction series that began with the Oasis Within and followed up by 7 big novels. He becomes the main editor of that whole series. And he still argues with me with every book. But like I sent him the Oasis Within. He said, what book should I read next? I said, read the Oasis Within. He emails me. He says, I'm on page 4 and it's too simplistic. I said, read at least the first 10 pages and get back to me. A week later, he writes me back. He said, this is the deepest, most fulfilling spiritual novel I've ever read in my life. I want to, are there going to be others? I said, yeah, I'm writing the second one now. He said, I want to be your editor. So that's how having a Dummies book in every Barnes and Noble in the world has benefited me. It has brought wonderful people into my life. And Lou, you know what it's like for the rest of our books. The bookstores will give them a few months and they better sell a lot of copies or they're off the shelf to make way for other books. I don't know what deal the Dummies people have. I mean, maybe they do know The Sopranos. So it's books they can't refuse, and the bookstores are always in the bookstores, and so I'm happy about that.
Well, the world works in mysterious ways, Tom, as you well know, but it's more than the power of Stoicism in this case. I suspect it also has something to do with the power of dialogue. Because you're open, you don't take umbrage, you don't get offended by people's objections. You're open and you're sincere. And when you dialogue with people, they become your partners in some way, as opposed to your enemies or your detractors or your hecklers, right?
Oh,
Best thing you can do with a heckler is get involved in a dialogue. So I think you have that ability in spades, and it's a wonderful thing. So tell us about your novels. This is another side of you, with a very rich character you are. So what is the fiction dealing with?
Well, it was February of 2011. I was downstairs in my house where I am now. I was having breakfast. I was planning to work on Plato's Lemonade Stand, a book that took me 15 years. I rewrote it 24 times. It had 6 different titles, and it was turned down 44 times. I tell y'all that because persistence, is really an important thing in not just publishing, but in anything we do. So I was working on, I think, version 23 or something, and I was having breakfast. I was supposed to come up here and sit down and start working. But at the breakfast table, I have the most vivid vision of my life. I'm a daydreamer, but this is like a daydream on steroids. An old man and a young boy are sitting in the desert somewhere up against a palm tree. They're having a conversation. And the conversation is so good, I come running up the stairs. I sit down here at my computer. I start typing away 10 pages of amazing conversation. So I post on Huffington Post, which Arianna Huffington had said to me in those years, anytime you want to put something on Huffington, no editors involved, we'll just let you directly put it up there. I said, I was one of the first people allowed to have a kind of a regular blog whenever I felt like it. But no regularity enforced, just whenever I felt like it. So I put 10 pages. Within 3 hours, I had emails from all over the world saying, "This is great. This is unbelievable. What is this?" I didn't know what it was. Is this from a book? Not that I know of. Next day, I got another 10 pages. The day after that is when I look up at the ceiling as I wake up, and this is what I see, the title, The Oasis Within. I said, well, I guess I'm writing a book. And it turns out a 70-year-old man, Ali Shabizer, in Egypt in 1934, is crossing the desert from a small western village to Cairo to take goods to market. His nephew, Walid, is along with him for the first time. And they start out, the book opens at an oasis. And Walid says, I wish we could stay here. I love this oasis. I wish we didn't have to leave. And his uncle says, well, you can take an oasis with you in this world wherever you go. And the boy says, well, what does that mean? And that launches the very stoic dialogue. Some people have told me this is the most stoic fiction they've ever come across, but it's even broader. It takes place in Egypt in 1934 and 1935, a place and time about which I knew almost nothing. And at the end of 6 hours of writing, I'd Google things I saw that day, a certain poisonous snake, a certain car, a certain kind of building. And it all turned out to be true of Egypt in 1934 and 1935, aside from the people who were fictional, the characters. The setting turned out to replicate. The king of Egypt gives a watch to two boys called a reverso. And this is 1934. There are reverso watches now. Jaeger-LeCoultre, Swiss manufacturer, makes reverso watches. Well, when did they exist in 1934? Well, they were first designed in 1929, I found out later, and released in 1932, 33, or in the early days, owned mostly by royal families, like the king that was giving them away to the boys. So I don't know how this works, whether it's a Jungian unconscious or what I was tapping into, but it ended up being my greatest philosophical education. If anybody said to me, who was your greatest philosophy teacher ever, it would be the fictional older guy in these novels. Yeah, but it ends up being the women as much as the guys. The women play an increasingly huge role. A group of young and middle-aged women in Cairo, and they taught me so much, Lou, about philosophy. They taught me so much about spirituality, about the resilience and power of the human spirit, that I did an international book club last year. We read the novels and met the last Sunday of each month. I had a rock guitarist from Germany. I had an AI specialist from Stanford University. I had every kind of person you could imagine in this book club. And it was the greatest book experience I've ever had. So I'm thinking about doing it again in a month or two, starting it up again this year and announcing it on social media. I just said as a joke last year about this time, it was March or April. I said, for the summer reading, I may reread my own novels. And a woman on LinkedIn said, why don't you let us all read them with you? And I said, okay. So I announced on Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter, now X, here's what I'm going to do. Let me know if you're interested. And it was just an amazing experience of people from every walk of life digging deep into practical and theoretical philosophy. So it was quite an experience.
You're giving me flashbacks to the 60s with all this mystical insight. Were you really in Cairo, or did you just...
No. I've never been there. In fact, my friends all said, you got to go to Cairo right away. You got to read all these books about Egyptian history. I said, no, I don't want to do anything that will pollute whatever is going on in my head right now. Because if I go there, I don't know if I'm getting the pure story or if I'm embellishing with what I see there. If I read books about it now, that'll mess me up too. I've got to just let the movie play in my head. It was like watching a movie every day. I'd be on an airplane, the movie would start playing. I'd have to grab paper and have the flight attendants bring me paper. I was in a swimming pool in Scottsdale, Arizona, trying to relax before a speech. And the movie started playing in my head. I ran into the spa and said, I need lots of paper. They gave me legal pads. I sat down beside the pool and wrote 3 chapters in fountain pen or ballpoint pen. So that was the way this crazy thing happened.
That's fantastic. So there's certainly positive craziness, and certainly if you get enough rejections, these are also paving stones on the road to success too. And I think people need to remember what you're saying very carefully, because we all need rejection in life. We all meet with rejection in life, especially us authors, but it always spurs us on to greater things, doesn't it?
It really does. And the books themselves, you guys will think this is crazy, But when I was interviewed, when Lou and I met, we were just starting to do philosophy for large numbers of people with our books, Plato, Not Prozac, and I had True Success if Aristotle Ran General Motors, and I think Philosophy for Dummies had just come out then, but a woman who had interviewed me for If Aristotle Ran General Motors in 1997, she was editor-in-chief of one of the women's magazines, as they were called, Mademoiselle, or one of the big, whatever the big women's magazines were there. She'd interviewed me. She was a real nice interviewer. But, Lou and I have been fortunate to be interviewed by a lot of folks when our books came out. And so you don't ever see the interviewer again. You move on. And so I was midway in my novel series, and I get an email one day. Hey, I was the editor-in-chief of one of the women's magazines. I interviewed you for your book, If Aristotle Ran General Motors. I think I'm supposed to talk to you. Could we set up a phone call? And I said, sure. And so she calls me. She said, I really think I'm supposed to talk to you. What are you doing now? I said, well, first of all, what are you doing? Well, after I left the magazine that I interviewed for, I ran Rosie, the magazine for Rosie O'Donnell, and then and it was 2 or 3 other big magazines. Then I decided to get out of magazines. I decided to become a coach for novelists. And I said, well, I'm writing novels now. Oh, are you? Maybe this is why I'm supposed to talk to you. Tell me about your novel writing. And I told her the story I just told you guys about the movie in my head and all this kind of thing. She says, I work with lots of novelists. Nobody I work with has ever had that experience. I know people who have. J.K. Rowling had it with Harry Potter. The writer, Stephanie, what's her name, with Twilight, she had it. And 2 or 3 other people she named with prominent series of books they've had. She said, this is a thing to be treasured. And I said, well, I don't know if I'll ever get these published because my agents won't even look at them. They say, no, the fiction people don't know you. Well, actually, the fiction people didn't know them, but they put it on me. And they said, give us your next nonfiction. What she said, I said, I don't know if they'll ever get into print. And she said, trust the process. Some of the greatest advice I've ever been given. She said, trust the process. The process that is giving you these stories will somehow give you their distribution. And I said, okay. She says, have faith in the process. I said, okay. That's kind of general good life advice, right? We think of life in terms of transactions. We think of life in terms of events, but life is mostly process. And we get frustrated and impatient sometimes with process, thinking it's going to be an event, not a process. But if we can learn to trust the process, this is deep in the Bhagavad Gita, this is deep in the Stoicism. Don't be so fixated. Don't grasp onto some intended goal so hard that you can't enjoy the process. You're all worried. You're all full of anxiety. Learn to relish, to love the process, whatever it might be. And I did. And before you knew it, I had a way to get the books out to people. So if you're tuned into something that you really think you ought to be doing, I didn't know anybody would ever give me a penny for these books. I wrote 8 books over a 6-year period of over 1 million words. You can imagine how long that took. Nobody was ever saying I would make any money out of this at all. I was postponing things that were income generating just to write these novels, because I thought I was supposed to. It's like when I was afraid of flying as a young professor. I didn't get on an airplane for 9 years. And then all of a sudden I was on 400 to 500 airplanes a year. And the philosophers at Notre Dame said, what do you all of a sudden think flying is safe? And I said, no, I all of a sudden think I'm supposed to do it. That's the thing about Aristotle's prime virtue of courage. If you are plugged in with a sense of purpose and a sense of service, where you think there's something you need to do, doesn't matter if people say it's risky, it's dangerous. How do you know that you're not wasting your time? You just do it. And that's a lesson I've learned many times in my life, like leaving Notre Dame. How are you giving up a guaranteed job for life? You're giving up 25 years of guaranteed income. 3 years after I left, my income that year was 25 times my Notre Dame salary. So I got it all back just by doing what I thought was right, even though I said, do you know businesses are going to still be interested in you in 6 months? No, I don't. I just know I'm supposed to try this.
Yeah. Well, you have a great inner sense of duty and purpose, and that's a gift. You're a gifted person, Tom, in more ways than one. But, this story is a twice told, thrice told, n-fold told tale. I mean, Melville, it took 25 years to find a publisher for Moby Dick, only one of the greatest American novels ever written, right? And Harry Potter, she was rejected by everybody to begin with.
Everybody.
Brown, everybody looked at Harry Potter and said, this is no good. What do they know? I mean, I'm not be disparaging, but you got to realize that the gatekeepers aren't always the ones who understand the culture that they're gatekeeping, right?
Yeah, Lou, you're so right. And even when Moby Dick does get published, it gets put in the whaling section of bookstores. Right? It wasn't even in the fiction section.
And Plato Not Prozac was rejected by 36 New York publishers the first time around also, and that said to us, we really have something now.
Yeah. Well, there you go. There you go, Lou. My first book I wrote when I was in college, it was on philosophy of religion, and it was rejected by 36 publishers. Same number. Number 37 said, okay, so I became a published author at the age of 22, only because we didn't give up, right? Lou didn't give up. I didn't give up. And that's the story is more common than not. The Beatles were told nobody wants guitar music, do something else. The Dixie Chicks were told nobody wants to hear banjo playing, go home. So it's perennial. It is a sign that you're on to something new, because the gatekeepers at the big distribution companies, whether it's music or whether it's books, they just want to repeat what was last year's success because they don't want to take any risk. So if you're not repeating somebody else's success, if you're doing something new, they're going to say no, which is your sign that you are indeed on to something new, which means, okay, now's the time for courage. Now's the time for persistence. Now's the time for trust in the process.
Indeed. And even when you're successful in a given domain, as you have been, they want to pigeonhole you, don't they? Tom Morris does this. Okay, do another one, Tom. Do another one, Tom. But God forbid you do something different. They're going to say, no, you can't do that. You do this.
You're absolutely right. My wife and I were talking about this today. My book on Harry Potter was originally called Harry Potter and the Meaning of Life. I was asked to speak at the International Harry Potter Convention of 2,500 screaming fans, all dressed in costume. There's Hogwarts, there's Gryffindor, there's Ravenclaw, except me. I'm the only guy not in costume. And still, philosophy got a standing ovation from the wizards and everybody there. But Doubleday wanted the book. They wanted it to be like if Aristotle ran General Motors. The head editor, Doubleday, said, look, we've always loved your book that you did with Henry Holt called If Aristotle Ran General Motors. Could you change this around, find a business to feature and call it, If Harry Potter Ran whatever? I said, well, I'll look into it. And so was it going to be Walmart? Was it going to be Amazon? Was it going to be Apple? It looked like GM was going through a big turnaround, General Motors. And so they even have a research facility called the House of Magic. So come on, I had to use General Motors, and I'd met the CEO of General Motors in some of my talks, and I said, okay, it'll be if Harry Potter ran General Motors. This will sell more books than you've ever sold before. It'll double the sales because you won't just get the Harry Potter crowd, you'll get the business crowd, and it'll just blow the roof off. Well, it was probably the least selling of my popular books because the Harry Potter people didn't trust the business stuff. Is this guy selling out Harry Potter? And the business people didn't trust the Harry Potter stuff. Is this just gimmicky stuff? And so a lot of people wouldn't give the book a try because it combined it. If it had been Harry Potter and the Meaning of Life, that would have been new. That would have been different. But publishers don't like to do new and different because it makes them itch.
Wow. I have a couple of questions more for you, and then I'm going to open the mic, okay?
Yeah, sure.
And we have some wonderful folks in attendance who I'm sure want to interact with you, so let's give everyone a chance. Two more questions, if you please. First of all, you have a bunch of guitars. You've always had a bunch of guitars, okay? So tell us about your career as a guitar player, please. We have that in common.
Well, it's like me dribbling a basketball and saying I'm like Michael Jordan. If you guys don't know it, Lou Marinoff is a great classical guitarist. I feel like I pluck on some strings now and then, but there's your guitarist on the screen here. And I mention that because, first of all, I wish everybody could hear Lou play guitar. Secondly, though, I wanted to play guitar at the age of 11. And my mother said, okay, there's a guy in town who teaches guitar lessons. He was a house painter by day and a guitar teacher by night. His name was Flossie Moon. Flossie Moon. And we went to his house one night. My mother took me, and his house was peeling with paint. The whole house with paint was peeling. And this guy was a professional house painter. And we go into his darkened house, and there's a back room that's all aglow. The most beautiful classical guitars lined up across this room. He sat down and played something that I could not believe. Turns out at the time, he was the second best known, according to some polls, classical guitar teacher in the world, right after Segovia. A guy who lived next to a railroad track in a peeling frame house in Durham, North Carolina, where Chet Atkins would come for advice on a classical album, where other classical guitarists would come for advice from Flossie Moon. So I took 3 months of lessons from Flossie Moon, and then I had to buy an electric guitar, a $54 Sears guitar, and a Sears amplifier that was probably $60. And I got a call from Flossie Moon. Tommy, I've heard that you've bought an electric guitar. Yes, sir. I'm going to be like the Beatles. It's a profanation of the instrument. I won't see you anymore until you get rid of that thing, he said. And I said, yes, sir. So that was the end of my classical guitar lessons.
Right.
Because here was Flossie Moon on the one hand. Here were all the girls in my high school on the other hand.
Yeah, no comparison, no contest. I understand that very well. We all wanted to be the Beatles back in the day. But what do you have back there? A Stratocaster?
I got two tellies. I got a purple telly, a pink telly, and a silver Strat. I got a light blue Carolina blue Strat downstairs. I've got about 12 guitars in the house right now.
You got the Fender amp. You got the Fender amps.
I got a ProSonic there, back there. I got a Blues Junior here. I've got an Ampeg 412 in the family room. I played in band. I traveled in bands, both rock and soul music. We opened for really good bands. We thought we were the Cat's Pajamas when we actually had a band open for us once at the University of Virginia or someplace. There was a band, a North Carolina band called the Occasions. I'm a Girl Watcher was their hit song. They were one-hit wonders at ABC Records.
I remember it.
Yeah, and so they had to go on tour with ABC, and so their manager called us and said, could you guys take over for all their events? And that's when we got bands opening for us, where we thought it was just the best thing in the world. My best friend in junior high had always wanted me to start a band with him, but he was a horrible musician. His instrument was a tambourine. He had no rhythm, and he was a singer who got kicked out of a volunteer Baptist church choir. The minister said, please serve God some other way. He would come to my house every day and let's start a band, Tom, let's start a band. I was already playing in bands. So I just said, no. Well, turns out I go to Chapel Hill. He goes to Duke in our hometown of Durham. His second year, like any good Duke student, he drops out as a Tar Heel. I'm required by law to suggest that. He moves to Nashville, where he's going to become a great musician. Now, you guys, we wanted to go kidnap him and deprogram him at that point. We thought it was pathetic. He was wasting his life. He told me not too long ago, he said, I lived alone in a crappy room with bad food and a rhyming dictionary for 2 years. And the only word I heard from other human beings was no. Then all of a sudden, he records one of his own songs he had written, and it's number 96 on the country charts. And a friend calls me to tell me about it. I go home to Durham for Christmas, where all the old friends would gather. He wasn't there. Where's Don? Where's Don? Oh, didn't you hear he had to stay in Nashville? Everybody's recording his songs. I said, what do you mean everybody? Who? Kenny Rogers is recording one. I don't know if y'all remember back to the 70s. Kenny Rogers was #1 singer in the world for a while on a couple of polls. Before he started roasting chicken and having plastic surgery full time. He was a big deal in music. My friend Don wrote a song for him. I said, what's the name of the song? My friend said, I think it's called The Gambler. You got to know when to hold them, know when to fold them. And then his next song was Forever and Ever, Amen. And then his next song was the Alison Krauss hit, beloved by my wife and anyone who's married to a talkative man, the song When You Say Nothing at All. He had 24 #1 songs, 55 top 5 songs, and songwriter of the year after year after year in the Songwriter Hall of Fame, first songwriter ever inducted into the Grand Ole Opry. And even at my age, I know that the next time I see him, I've got a question for him. Does he want to start a band?
Yeah. Well,
Not a
Tom,
person you want to be around.
if ever you get tired of philosophy, you could almost certainly do stand-up comedy because you're extremely entertaining as well as substantive. One more question for you, my friend. What do
Yeah.
you, it's now I understand it's probably not even a good question because you're
Yeah.
doing you're multitasking all over the place. I was going to ask you what you're working on now as though it were one thing, but
Yeah.
what's at the top of your pile that you're working on now?
Yeah, it's a crazy time because we just had a bunch of books come out in a row. Let me see if I can find this one here. My old friend who just passed away recently, and you guys, he was working till the age of 101. So we all have limited time on this earth, but if we do it right, we have more time than we think sometimes, you know? Don't live as if that's going to happen, but it might. He was doing new TV shows at the age of 100. Norman Lear, the TV producer, All in the Family, Sanford and Sons, with Mary Hartman, Fried Green Tomatoes, This is Spinal Tap, Princess Bride, movies he produced. He called me one day and asked me to do a book based in the values of the Declaration of Independence. So the book is called The Everyday Patriot, How to Be a Great American Now. Second edition just came out. I mentioned that because then the second edition came out of this, The Art of Achievement, which was originally done. It's a silver anniversary, originally written in the 90s, and then Stoicism came out. These were like boom, boom, boom. I'm finally writing a book I tried to start for 3 years because when the pandemic hit and there was a shutdown, I started getting calls from business groups all over the country. We need your help dealing with difficult change, disruptive change. We don't know how to deal with this pandemic. Could you speak to our executive team? Okay. Well, here's the problem. We don't have a budget for a Zoom speaker, a virtual speaker. Okay, this is March of 2020. I'll still do it. So for March, April, and May, 2 or 3 times a week, I was giving free talks again, just like when I started, because people needed it. And when the other speakers were sitting at home waiting for in-person events to be rescheduled, I was getting really good as a Zoom presenter. And then the other speakers who hadn't done that, when paid work came around, they were like deer in the headlights, giving a talk on Zoom rather than a stage. But I had done it so much, I knew how to do it, right? But I wanted, everybody was asking about disruptive change. My book, Plato's Lemonade Stand, about disruptive change had just come out. People thought, oh, you're a genius right before 2 months before the pandemic, you write about disruptive change. No, it's just the coincidence. It took me 20 years to 15 years to write that book, 20 years on a different one. But everybody was asking about the same thing until 2 years ago. They started asking a different question. It wasn't we're having trouble with disruptive change anymore. It was we're having trouble with uncertainty. There's so much uncertainty, political uncertainty, economic uncertainty, ecological uncertainty. It's coming from all directions. We just don't know how to survive in an environment of so much uncertainty. So in the Oasis Within, there's a point at the end of the book where the young man, 13-year-old Waleed, says, there's so much uncertainty in my life right now. I don't know what to do. And the old man says, consider the possibility that uncertainty is a gift. And I thought, well, what does that even mean? I mean, uncertainty makes us worried and anxious and, fearful. And then he goes on to say a few words about viewing uncertainty as a gift. And I thought that's the next book I want to write, The Gift of Uncertainty. Really? I tried to start it 3 years ago, then 2 years ago, then a year ago when the Dummies people called, I was going to do it. And Lou, it was going to be a superficial book because I had not experienced the depths of uncertainty that I was due to experience this past July when my wife woke up one day with yellow skin and yellow eyes and had blood tests, and her cholesterol was 666, which I didn't know cholesterol could be. And right to the emergency room, and you've got a gallstone that's loose and blocked a duct, and we'll do endoscopic. And they did that. And no, it's not a gallstone, it's a growth. It ends up being one of the rarest and most aggressive cancers, ampullary cancer. Of 100,000 cancer patients, 1 will have ampullary cancer. It requires the most extensive surgery done, which is called a Whipple procedure. She had her surgery August 10th for 7.5 hours. It was supposed to be 5. You can imagine what it was like for me the last 2.5 hours. We lived in a hospital room for 18 days. I slept in a chair, well, when sleeping was possible, which was hardly ever. And then we slept in a basement for a month after that. We were away from home 2 months. And they call it the one curative cancer surgery. So when our pathology came back, it was You won't need any chemo. You won't need any radiation. You're good to go for life. But the uncertainty that we went through up until there, I had never been through that depth of uncertainty before. And so I was not going to be allowed to write a book on the gift of uncertainty until I had had my nose rubbed in the worst kind of uncertainty there is and made it through. So I've just started the book 3 weeks ago. I'm 61,000 words into it. It's going to be a book I can be proud of.
I think we'll all be very keen to read it. And of course, philosophers are no strangers to uncertainty. Our friend Descartes knew a thing or two about it, and it certainly helped him. But I think philosophers, just because of our temperament, and perhaps on a good day, our courage, are able to handle it better than most folks and befriend it and treat it like a guide on our path. And then if you can make friends with uncertainty, you'll be fine. And you've obviously been compelled to do that. So let's look forward to your book. Want to open the floor, Tom. You're so interesting and you have so much to say to us. It's really wonderful seeing you again and listening to you. We have some terrific people in the audience, and I would now welcome anyone who wants to put up an electronic hand. Rick, okay, and then owner, which I think is Karen, but it says owner. Karen, you're the owner of Karen, I assume. So Rick, you go first. Ibrahim, I see your hand up as well. Okay, Rick, you're on.
Unmute yourself, and then ask.
They know.
Okay.
Okay, Rick, go ahead, please.
Hey, Tom, I was fascinated by what sounds like some kind of daemon or inspiration from something like a Holy Spirit. I'm just curious. I know you don't have the metaphysical answers to that question, but what's your hunch about the source of this inspiration?
Well, I was originally asked, the first time I ever told that story, it was to I was going to talk to a famous, I think it was a pharmaceutical company in New Jersey, and I mentioned the story in the course of my talk about something else. And a woman came up to me afterwards and said, "You lived a past life. That's all. You've got all the signs of a past life." I said, "Well, I don't know. I think I would be a lot smarter now if I had lived a past life. I'm hardly getting it right this time around." But she said, "Consider that possibility." And so the next person who came up to me, it was like, you sound like you've been divinely inspired for this book. I don't know if it's Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and Tom. I'm not sure I could be included in that group. Maybe. I said, like the past lives purpose, maybe the Jungian collective unconscious. I grew up in a family where my mother could talk to my grandmother could talk to animals. They seemed to know what she was saying. She could heal. She could bring dead plants back to life. She was kind of the healer in the country. They lived on 200 acres out in the middle of nowhere. My father, as a teenager, worked at the Martin Aircraft Company in Baltimore, Maryland, and got his work done so fast, his work for the week, that he could make trips anywhere he wanted to, anytime he wanted to. And every now and then made a random trip to Sanford, North Carolina, actually a little town called Cameron outside Fort Bragg in Sanford. He would make these random trips home, and his place was set at the dinner table. And his father said, "She never sets your place except the day you're going to show up." She would always know the day he was coming home. My father himself, I won't give you all a lot of stories. I'll tell you one thing. He was supposed to go call on a Presbyterian minister who owned a lot of land. My father eventually had his own little real estate company. And he goes out to Reverend Harris's house and goes to knock on the door. And before his hand can touch the door, he hears a voice in his head say, "Don't disturb him. He's dead." So my father turns around and gets in his GMC Suburban and drives home. Now, on the surface of it, "Don't disturb him. He's dead" is kind of a self-contradictory thing, right? If a person's dead, you can't disturb him, right? He goes home. My mother says, "You were supposed to be with Reverend Harris this afternoon. What are you doing home?" "He's dead." "What do you mean he's dead? We saw him day before yesterday. He was fine." My father said, "Well, I heard this voice." And my mother says, "Yeah, And so an hour or two later, they get a call from the guy's son. Dad was found dead of a heart attack right inside the front door. I grew up in a family where things sort of happen that you don't really have a scientific explanation for. I know I was at Notre Dame to give an endowed lecture for the business school several months ago. And some guy yells my name. And he said, "You Tom Morris?" I said, "Yes, I am." He said, "I was your teaching assistant in 1983. I said, "How do you even recognize me now?" He said, "You did have hair then." But I said, "What are you doing here on campus still?" You didn't do your PhD taking this long? He said, no. He said, I got my PhD in philosophy, then got my PhD in high energy particle physics. And that's what I teach now. But you taught me how to be a teacher. I just wanted to tell you that. I said, man, thanks. Well, I know a bunch of people in physics, and they just can't yet agree on how weird the world really is. They sort of outdo each other all the time on it's even weirder than you think. No, I think it's even weirder than you think. And it's almost as if matter is decomposing under our gaze so that the world things become possible, action at a distance, entanglement, all this stuff becomes a reality that you would never have thought possible. And the world is probably stranger than we can even imagine. So I try not to take a concrete view on how I got my stories. Or the graduate students at Notre Dame. See, I never thought I had my grandmother's gift. I never thought I had my father's gift. But I did remember when the novel started playing in my head that the graduate students at Notre Dame would always say, how do you always know what the next big thing in philosophy of religion is going to be before everybody else? You're like the first guy who does, that I wrote on the incarnation. No philosopher had written on the incarnation, the central Christian doctrine since the Middle Ages. And then it became a big thing. I wrote on perfect being theology, the idea of God not as a creator, but as a greatest possible being. Nobody had paid any attention to that since Anselm in the Middle Ages. But it just launched this huge literature on perfect being theology. How are you always the guy who knows the next big thing? I don't know. I'm not Lou Marinoff, but I'm doing the best I can.
Oh, give me a break. I think we're often better off not knowing how we know things. And it cuts against the grain of rationality, but it works a lot better sometimes, Tom. And you're living.
Quick follow up.
One quick follow up, Rick. We got to go to the others.
No, just to thank you. Excellent. I love your response. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you so much, Rick. I appreciate you, man.
Thanks, Rick. That was really great. Great to chime in. Thank you so much. Karen, you're up. Go ahead, please unmute.
Okay, so my first question for you, Tom, see if you've heard this one, see if you know the answer to this. How do you know if someone went to Notre Dame?
Oh, gee, that I don't know. I've never heard this one. You have to tell me.
They will tell you.
Yeah, the same thing tends to be true of my other alma mater, Yale.
Yeah.
You got to wear the shirt. Why? Hey, Ellie, Notre Dame's the same way.
So I noticed your cup there, Notre Dame coffee cup along the way. But so that's my in to say that I went to Notre Dame, and my roommate was a TA of yours between 86 and 91.
Really?
And I just kind of placing this all together, but I'll tell you the story. How I'm pretty sure she would dance around the townhouse and where we lived, the graduate students, and she was sort of learning how to be comical and theatrical and stuff as a teacher, as TA, whatever. And I just remember your name as a dynamic presence in the classroom. I think even before I didn't TA my first year, but I think she did from the beginning. And she came up, and then as life turns out, I was under Ralph McInerney.
Oh yeah, sure.
And she did her dissertation under Alistair McIntyre, and then she was offered a job where I am now in northeastern Pennsylvania, a little rusty place. And she turned it down, and then they asked Alistair if he had anyone else, and he gave me. So awesome. It's interesting how we're all twisted around. The last thing I heard about her, the TA, was she became a chair at Marquette. I haven't heard from her for years, but
wow.
It's just interesting. Yeah.
I mean, what a kick to meet you, because Ralph McInerney had just written a children's book when I came to teach philosophy at Notre Dame. He was one of the older professors. He had just written a really fun children's book, and he was doing a mystery series that actually got put on TV. And Alistair McIntyre, #1 guy in ethics in the world, it was amazing that he was on the committee that made me a full professor at Notre Dame. And one of my undergraduates that I didn't know was in my class, because I had an eighth of the student body some years. I had, a lot of kids in class. He was in my intro class and decided because of that class to become a philosophy major, and did the first undergraduate honors thesis with Alistair, and decided to go to NYU law school because of somebody who was teaching at NYU one semester, Dworkin or somebody who was teaching at NYU. And he didn't want to become a lawyer. He wanted to understand philosophy of law. But he gets his law degree just to understand philosophy of law. And then what he goes on to do is he was the first guy to put law schools online for online education. University of Miami Law School, Arizona State, which ended up being a paradigm for virtual stuff. So I have philosophy majors who started off in my class. Another one I met years ago. Oh, I was in your class and I was a philosophy major because of your class. Really? What'd you do? What'd you do with your philosophy degree? I'm on the FBI counterterrorism SWAT team. So, I mean, you just never know. And I said, so where are you on the counterterrorism SWAT team? He said, Newark, New Jersey. And I said, why Newark, New Jersey? And this was during the early days of Afghanistan. He said, if I can quote my former philosophy student, when a bunch of Navy SEALs whack a guy, Taliban, and they pull off his body phones, they're always programmed to numbers in Newark, New Jersey. It's my idea to find out who they're talking to. It's my job to find out who they're talking to. So I got philosophy majors one guy who became a best-selling novelist. They've gone into everything you can possibly imagine. So I'm proud to meet another of the fight.
Yeah. And if I might add a little challenge question for you now. Mm-hmm. This could go on for a long time, but just a little thought. I'm having sort of like misgivings about this philosophy for dummies. And I want to say, throw in a little humor, I would say philosophy for smarty cats. I have a cat and I don't know, there's something. But anyway, here's the anecdote. And then this could go on for a long time, but I just want to throw it out there.
We have other questions. Please be brief.
Yes.
I will. I went to a Home Depot in California, and I was making keys. I had to make 3 sets of keys for my family, and family situation. And the man making the keys started talking about life being funny, life being humorous, life being comedy. And I said, it is, but I don't know if I use this word, but I wanted to say not essentially. So here's a big question for you. Okay. Is life essentially a comedy? What is life essentially? That's $1 million question, but I'll throw that out to you. I say life is not essentially a comedy. What would you say life is?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I won't dodge it by saying that. I will say that in preparing for Stoicism for Dummies, and when I did philosophy for dummies, I said, what are you guys going to do, neuroscience for nitwits? I mean, does this even make sense? Until I realized, wait a minute, Socrates, his whole thing was, with all the big questions, we all start off as dummies. And the quicker we realize that and acknowledge it, the faster we can make progress. So I said, okay, with that kind of handle on the dummies thing, I'll go with it. And when I was rereading the Stoics recently, and I had to do an event on Marcus Aurelius, a global event this past Tuesday, a few days ago, for the Buenos Aires-based organization Classical Wisdom. And in preparing for that, I realized all the times that Epictetus makes me laugh, all the times that Marcus Aurelius makes me smile. And sometimes it's because when he gets so morbid in some passages, so pessimistic, it's almost like the humor of the absurd. Like the guy in Boston, what's his name, Stephen Wright, who says stuff like, I go into a diner that has a big sign that says breakfast served anytime, so I sat down and ordered French toast in the Renaissance. I mean, it's stuff like that. The humor of the absurd we love. Is life essentially a comedy? I understand that a real argument can be made for that. I think life is more like Navy SEAL training, to tell you the truth. And you make it through that by learning to laugh. So the comedy part is a wonderful coping mechanism, first of all, but it's something else, secondly. And that reflects Stoicism. For a lot of people, Stoicism is a coping mechanism. But then it becomes a mechanism not just to cope, but to conquer, because the two things can't fully be separated. Comedy ends up for us in SEAL training here in this world, the spiritual version of SEAL training, starts off often as the coping mechanism, but then it becomes a way to conquer as well. And it becomes a heuristic. We can discover sometimes deep truth through comedy, which is why I always have fun. And I used to tell my TAs, philosophy is serious, but that doesn't mean it's somber. So we can have fun with it. We can play with ideas. And it's not going to be, well, laugh a minute all the time. There are some very serious things we grapple with. But I think comedy can be a tool into deeper insight, into highlighting things we might overlook. We don't need to always avert our eyes when we take things to an extreme. Now, the Stoics are often like the ending of Thelma and Louise. The Stoics often have great ideas that they will drive the car off the cliff. They go too far. And we don't have to drive the car off the cliff, but we can sometimes look at the absurdity, even laugh at the absurdity, and find the real insight that's in the neighborhood. That's a good question.
Good answer.
Proud
Thanks.
of a domer to ask a question like that. You're a true domer.
And there you go. See, Tom, you can run, but you can't hide. We have Karen as a regular at these events. I had no idea, Karen, that Notre Dame was that you're a graduate. And your alma mater.
I thought she was a plant. I thought for sure.
She's not a shill. She's not a shill. We don't fake anything in here or prearrange. So this is more, what do you want to call it? Synchronicity. It's great. Yeah. Thank you so much, Karen. Much appreciated. Ibrahim, Professor Ozdemir, please unmute. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Tom. I am really, I just delved into your book and you just start with the revival of Stoicism. When I started my graduate studies at Middle East Technical University in Turkey, and it was a department dominated with analytical and positivist philosophy. Yeah. One day we have a guest philosopher, of course, from analytical tradition. And one of our colleagues says, Professor, I am just confused. Can you tell me what philosophy can tell me about in my practical life? He said, philosophy doesn't say anything to you. Just go to the Department of Theology to learn about, daily practice, what you can do. And then he was very disappointed. And then I just look outside of analytical tradition. I discovered Arnanes, the founder of deep ecology. Then I did my PhD. I insisted to write my dissertation in environmental ethics. Although my analytical philosopher they were not happy, but then I know I can see there was also revival in ecofeminism and environmental ethics and Joanne Macy, just revival of eco-Buddhism in America. I think. On the one hand, you and also other colleagues who was just Lou and others with this new interpretation of philosophy in practical life, and on the other hand, ecofeminist and also environmentalist philosophers, they tell us philosophy still matters, philosophy still can give us something in our daily life and overcome our problems. Would you like to say about that?
I think that's a very insightful thing to say. Lou and I were unusual in our time because philosophy had started to mimic the sciences, the formalism, the technical language, the technical apparatus, and cut itself off from most of the culture, right? So it's no surprise that people are saying, maybe we should close our philosophy department because they don't understand that philosophy has evolved since the 80s and 90s into something very rich. For about 100 years, most philosophy in most philosophy departments was theoretical only. I like to say that philosophy is about ideas and implementation. Ideas and implementation. But in theoretical philosophy, both the implementation and the ideas are fully conceptual. The implementation is to take that idea and put it in an argument. In practical philosophy, the ideas and the implementation can be very different. The ideas are conceptual, but the implementation can be very practical, can be very existential, can be very psychological. Philosophy presented itself for a while as if it was all about discovery and information, just very esoteric information. The analytic tradition was where I was trained as well. I was reading the Odyssey 3 years ago. Homer's Odyssey, I reread 4 times in 1 year in 3 different translations. And the 4th reading, I finally think I understood it. I reread the Iliad that year twice, and I think I understood it for the first time, but I still need to do it a couple more times. I never understood until my 4th reading in that year of the Odyssey why the first 100 pages are not about really Odysseus. They're more about Telemachus, his son. And Athena, the goddess who loves Odysseus and knows where he is every minute of every day because he's her favorite, she disguises herself as an old man and visits the island of Ithaca, where Telemachus, 20 years old, doesn't even remember his father. His father's been away for almost 20 years. Is he alive or dead? He will ask every stranger who comes to the island, is my father alive or dead? He goes up to this old man, and Athena in disguise, and says, stranger, do you know if my father's alive or dead, Odysseus? And Athena, who knows exactly where he is, says, well, I think he's alive, but I could be wrong. You really need to go see Nestor, but to do that, you need to get a ship and a crew of men. And if he doesn't know the answer, he probably knows. But if he doesn't know, then you got to go see Menelaus. That's an even worse voyage. You're going to go on a very dangerous voyage. Oh, okay, he says. And if you come back and if you find out the answer is yes, he's alive, then wait a year. And then you're going to have to deal with these suitors who are trying to marry your mother. And if he's not alive, so she's acting as if she doesn't know for sure whether he's alive, and she does know. Why is she playing this game with Telemachus? Telemachus thinks he needs information. She knows he needs transformation. He needs to go through an arduous adventure to transform him so that he can become a worthy partner for his father when he returns home. Philosophy is meant to transform us. And the theoretical has taken over to such an extent, we think we're being informed. Well, we're supposed to be transformed. And so I think both Lou and I and more philosophers since the 80s have come to use theoretical in support of the practical, not as an antagonistic endeavor. So I see guys who just did philosophy of mathematics in graduate school doing practical philosophy now, and it's a wonderful thing that I applaud. And of course, in Turkey, that's a homeland of so much of what people think is Greek philosophy. It was actually in Turkey. And I had, if Aristotle Ran General Motors became an important book in the country of Turkey, I was actually asked to do a video for a company there. The leadership had asked a young man, and I can't remember his name, but he said to me, could you do a video for our executive team? And then I'm supposed to report on your book. But I said, yes, I'll do that. And he said, well, I have one more favor. Could you start off with my name and the sentence, my good friend, so-and-so, whatever his name was. I said, yeah, I'll do that. So the video said, my good friend. And he said, thank you so much. Now they all think I'm an important person. So I love you guys in Turkey. I think you do really good philosophy, and it's a pleasure to be asked that question.
And yes, thank you very much for this very good answer. In Turkey, you and also Lou is very famous. Your books also stuff like
well, yeah, we have between us quite a few books in Turkish, Tom. But Professor Ozdemir, our friend Ibrahim, is a wonderful practical philosopher in his own right, and is building the same thing out, that we've been doing here. He's building it in Turkey. He's a pioneer there. He's translated a lot of work into Turkish, so he's part of the team. So thank you very much, Ibrahim. It's great to see you.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for the question. Before we go to Patricia, who, of course, we're going to go to momentarily, I want to give a shout out to a very, very dear and esteemed friend who's in the house with us, Coach Jerry Kelly, also an educator and former university president. Jerry, welcome. It's so great to see you. And Jerry was basically my high school football coach and taught us a lot about winning and a lot about how to be champions. And I will never forget the lessons that we all learned from you and carry to this day, Coach. So if you'd like to unmute and say hello, you're more than welcome to do so. Tell us how you're doing. Are you still in beautiful Vancouver Island?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
That's great. No, I'm retired as a university president, and I would like to ask Tom. A friend of mine was the president of the University of Michigan. He spent most of his life, talking about the need to transform universities.
Yeah.
So my question, Tom, if you had an opportunity to transform universities into the 21st century, what comes to mind?
I'd include some humanities education in every faculty, in every department, however far from the humanities. I just finished a book I worked on for 20 years, and it's being shown to publishers right now. It's based on two of Mary Shelley's novels, Frankenstein, the novel everybody knows about, and a novel nobody seems to know about that was published in 1826 about a pandemic in the 21st century that kills everybody. Quite a topic. It's called The Last Man, told by the last living human being. And they share many common themes between the two books. And the themes have to do with Victor Frankenstein, for example, was a very smart man who did everything that motivational speakers say you're supposed to do to be successful. And so he was successful in creating a monster he couldn't control. Isn't that an amazing metaphor for the financial meltdown that created the recession, for our worries about artificial intelligence, our worries about nanotechnology, about bioengineering, our worries about political parties these days? People succeeding in creating monsters they can't control. When you understand what Mary Shelley was all about, you can use her ideas to go reread Gilgamesh and the Iliad and the Odyssey and the Aeneid and Xenophon's Education of Cyrus and Beowulf, Don Quixote, Moby Dick. Through the 20th century, Sinclair Lewis. I think we need the humanities now more than we've ever needed the humanities. And I would love to see universities reconfigured so that whatever you're studying, whether it's engineering, whether it's law, whether it's medicine, you're introduced to the best of the humanities that relate to your subject matter. I'd love to see that.
Yeah, Duderstrat's concern is that the way universities are organized limit their ability to change and keep pace with the change that's taking place in the 21st century.
Right, you're right. Absolutely. Absolutely. We need to do something about that.
Yeah, the content is good. It's the organization of the university that's an issue.
And
some would argue that you've
world...
got to go. Some would argue that you've got to return to the initial development of the universities. The Crusaders came home and they were hired by students to share the knowledge they had picked up in the Far East. Yeah. And by the way, if the professors were really good, they got paid.
Not that different from the present day, right? Except we pay even people who aren't that good. You're so right. The corporate world had to learn some lessons years ago about getting rid of levels of bureaucracy, trying to get away from this, what they call silos of different departments in a company that would never even talk to each other. Mm-hmm. The university needs to get back to its name of the uni part. Let's unite the disciplines in ways that we find in the real world outside the university system. The part of the real world that is the university system needs to reflect more of that conceptual diversity and training, I think.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm writing a book on reformation of the university, but this is very, very interesting.
Good for you.
Very helpful.
Hurry up, Coach. Hurry up. We need that book, okay? We definitely need that book. Don't delay.
And Louis, you were a great football player. You're a great guitarist and just a wonderful guy. It's nice to see you.
Well, it's always wonderful to see you too, Coach. Be well. Is your wife is still writing? Is she still a best-selling author? I mean, she was doing great things also with books last time I saw you guys.
Yeah, she's written a couple of books on golfing for new golfers. For ladies, a book called Feeling Naked on the First Tee.
Oh.
She didn't see herself as a writer. She just started playing golf, and she found there are thousands of books out, but nothing that's just simply, here's what you should wear. Somebody says you get out in the parking lot, you go to the pro shop, lots of pro shop, and which part of the course is the green.
Ah, interesting. That's good. I like that.
Anyhow, it had $1 million in sales, so that's my retirement program.
That's awesome.
Oh, great. Thank you so much, Coach. Great to see you. Come back and join us again next time, okay?
Thank you, Coach.
And finally, Patrizia, last but not least, I think. Thank you so much for your patience, Patrizia. Please go ahead, unmute, and you're on.
Thank you. Thank you, Lou. And thank you, Tom, for your speech. Hi,
Thank you,
I'm
Tracy.
talking from Italy. So,
Oh.
but you are like a river in flood of energy. So I'm still very awake. So, so really, I couldn't. Yeah, and thanks a lot. Also, because I will take away two key messages from your speech. I mean, of course, you gave us a lot of your life and experience, but two key messages. The first one is the last one that you transmitted. It's uncertainty as a gift.
Yeah.
This is I think this is a very strong and contemporary message.
Good,
and
good.
the other one is trust the process, which is very, very important as well. And the question that I wanted to pose you is regarding, you quoted quite a lot of sources of references, of course, Stoicism and Socrates and Aristotle. And is there any other philosopher that you found particularly inspiring you, or you are rereading now, or any contemporary? I mean, who you are inspiring us with your books, and I've read a couple of your books, but of course I will go on, and I appreciate it a lot. Who is inspiring you now? I mean, there is any book that you can, I always ask this question, even when I interview, any books that you're reading now that you are appreciating a lot, that you find any, not only philosophy, of course, but even literature. If there is any author that you're reading now, that you can suggest us, or you are rereading a philosopher that you found. And this is, I mean, just change suggestion. This is a question. If you are tracing your inspiration from other authors, apart from Lou, of course, and you both influence each other. If there is anything that you are, or a movie, for example, because this is a very fertile, in my opinion, a very fertile period of movie I saw recently a fantastic movie like Harvest Moon, for example, all directed in Mongolia, and I mean there are a lot of new beautiful movies. So if there is any experience that is inspiring you in this moment, this is the question.
I just read for the first time in my life. I didn't used to read great literature. I did technical stuff in college and in graduate school. I hardly ever read novels or poetry or short stories or plays. And in my adult life, starting in my 50s, I remember reading some interviews with famous novelists. What's the greatest novel ever written? And almost everyone would say Don Quixote. I said, well, I've never read Don Quixote. A new translation had just come out, 900 and some pages, which is why I'd never read Don Quixote, I'm sure. But I read Don Quixote. And I thought, okay, what is next? Maybe another big book that I've never read, Moby Dick. Maybe Moby Dick. If I had been the guy's editor, there would be a lot less whale blubber in that book and a lot more on the ideas. But anyway, and then about 3 or 4 years ago, I read most of Jane Austen's novels over a period of a summer.
Wow.
Pride and Prejudice, Sensibility, Emily, Northanger Abbey.
Fantastic.
And just this past few months, I've reread Jane Austen.
Yeah,
like Mary Shelley. And people don't think of Mary Shelley as a philosopher at all. Well, her mother was a well-known philosopher. Her dad was a well-known philosopher. No surprise that she's very philosophical too. Along with Mary Shelley, Jane Austen is one of the best writers on appearance and reality, on illusion and truth. Her characters always think they understand the people around them. They form preconceptions, and then confirmation bias heaps on those preconceptions, and they couldn't be more wrong, but they're so sure that they're right. And usually by the end, they come to realize how wrong they've been. So it's reading a lot of women novelists who have deep insight about the human condition that has really turned me around. And I'll read like Thomas Hardy, another 19th century British novelist, who says wonderful things like, in The Mayor of Casterbridge, he has a character say, when we're young, we're full of zest, but have very little wisdom. And when we're old, we have much more wisdom and very little zest. And so how do we ever get anything done? It's bringing these two things together in your life. Fiction, good fiction, has fed my soul for quite a few years now. I've taken much inspiration, some from poetry too, and some from great epics like Gilgamesh. I've read about 12 or 15 times. Beowulf, I've read probably 20 times. Every time I peel off more layers of what's going on in the story. I like to think of Beowulf as written by a woman because the monster who's the strongest monster is the mother of Grendel, right? And she seems to portray the male ego and the conquering hero ego, the way Mary Shelley is portrayed. The writer of Beowulf, we don't know who the writer was. And one reason we might not know is because if it was a woman writer, she would never want that to be known because nobody would read it at the time. But she critiques so many of the things that we guys are guilty of in a way that Mary Shelley also does. So I love things like that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Patrizia.
Thank you so much.
Good to see you again. Grazie.
Grazie.
Tom, we're almost out of time. I just want to say two things to you. First of all, I don't believe there is any fiction. I think, and I've written that fiction is just truth in disguise.
There you go.
That's one point right back to
Athena. Like Athena, truth is just truth in disguise, right?
Truth in disguise. And, the subtitle of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is A Modern Prometheus.
That's right.
So she foresaw, presciently enough, just like her mother, Mary Wollstonecraft, foresaw women's liberation, of course, in a time when it was unthinkable, 1790s. But she, her daughter, Mary, foresaw that we would steal not only fire from the gods, but also DNA from the gods and pay a price for it, as you know, alluding to that other novel.
Sure.
Tom, I can't thank you enough for being with us today. We're all energized, and I hope that you will keep on ticking as you usually do and grace us with yet more works. I look forward to keeping in touch with you and reading, but we're all enormously grateful. I want to thank our wonderful audience for joining us. We have old friends and new friends and members of the public in the house. Guests, you're all welcome back. Our next Agora is going to be on the 17th of February with Ida Jongsma, our wonderful friend and Dutch practitioner and former proprietor of the Hotel de Philosophe in Amsterdam. Ida, you're going to be great. Although Tom is a pretty tough act to follow, I think you'll manage quite well next month. But Tom, our hearts go out to you. Our minds go out to you. Thank you so much.
Well, Lou, you are the greatest possible host. You have such amazing talents for bringing out the best in people. I think Jimmy Fallon should be worried about his job as late night host. I think you could take over in a second there at NBC Late Night.
Well, thanks. But at my age, I tend to go to bed a bit earlier now and get up, so I think he's in safe territory for the moment. But thank you for the thought. This has been great. It will eventually find its way onto YouTube as long as all the participants, of course, approve of the video. But we'll send that to you, for your inspection in due course. Can we all join in giving a virtual round of applause to Tom for this wonderful present? Thank you so much. You see, there's a lot of appreciation, Tom.
And to Lou, to the wonderful Lou Marinoff.
Thanks again, everyone. Look forward to seeing you next month with Ida. Tom, we'll be in touch, and all the best to you. We've got so much to read now, thanks to you. Take care of yourselves, everybody. Bye-bye for now. Be well, be safe, be philosophical, and check out Tom Morris.